Hi, Grant. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Okay, thank you.
I think my brain is still twisted from trying to outline Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, yep, you're not wrong. Shows me you did the work.
Yeah, I was going through like, well, I think this is the pattern, as I'm going through research and stuff. Yeah, it was. I love that book though. That's one of my
Yeah,
favorites.
yeah, I agree. And you'll probably change your mind down the road too. You know what the outline is. The more you study it. Just give it a few more minutes to see if rest of the class shows up.
Is there an interruption?
Hey, Richard.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm still kicking.
What do you do for the summer if you teach a school? What do you do for the summer?
Whatever I want.
Oh, good for you.
Um, yeah, I mean, really, I can do whatever I want. I do have a side gig that I do just whenever, because we have a lot of like 3-day weekends and 4-day weekends, and we get spring break off, and then Christmas and Thanksgiving, and so we get a lot of time off during. So I have kind of like a side gig that I do deliveries from Walmart.
Okay.
And it's kind of a perfect job for for being in school and for working at a school. Because if I don't want to go out for months, I don't, and it's not a problem. If I wanted to go out right now for 2 hours or an hour or one delivery or 15 hours, whatever, it's really kind of convenient for that.
Oh, okay. When's your semester end? When your summer schools? When the summer start?
May 28th is graduation,
Okay.
and then we're off until July 28th or so. July
Oh,
20th,
okay.
something like that. So I think ends up being about 6 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Wow, you go back early.
Yeah, for July.
Yeah. I think school starts August, but we do this big thing called forum where our school is a statewide, and so we have different locations all over the state. We have 600 employees, and we all meet at this big hotel for 2 days and have a big conference and do some trainings and give out awards and go over what we did last year, what we're going to do next year. And it's kind of a cool thing.
Okay.
My audio cut out. What do you do for the school again?
I'm an academic coach, which is kind of just like a mentor. I mean, one of my friends he was worked there a couple years before I started, he was basically like telling me, well, you're basically a resource manager, like I get to know the kids, I build a relationship with them, I find out any barriers that they're facing, if they don't have, if they're struggling with food, I'll link them up with the SEG who'll get them food. Or if they're struggling with mental health crisis, I'll link them up with the counselors. If they're struggling with school, I'll hook them up with their teachers, or sometimes I'll tutor them myself. Or um, I was kind of thinking about that when I was in high school. They didn't care what was going on at home. They just like, well, what, where's your homework? Why are you late? And they didn't really care if. And it amazes me some of the things that some of these kids are dealing with. And,
How many kids in your school?
um, well, there's 6,000 altogether statewide. In our site, there's 200 and something. And my pod is between 29 and 35.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I don't know. I've been there about a year and a half now, so I'm still kind of trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. Um, but it's kind of nice. I had a teacher send me a message where in her class she asked if there was like one goal employee that you would like to thank and why. And one of the students was just like, I want to thank my coach, Mr. Rich, because, he's always reaching out and looking out for me and telling me what I need to do. Even when I don't get back to him, he's still there, and it's kind of nice to hear.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're helping students. You can make an impact for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And they'll remember
And
that.
that's something that I kind of try to do, is to help them to think differently. Like, I can't make them do something, I can't
Yeah.
make them do their homework, or so I just try to kind of help them to see the value in education, the value in themselves, that they matter and that they can make an impact in the world, and that their choices matter.
Yeah. You're talking about wisdom, really. So
Yeah,
making wise choices, making wise choices.
yeah.
Oh, all right, good. All right, guys. So we finished the book of Proverbs. So what are your top two takeaways from the book of Proverbs? Things you don't want to forget.
Wisdom's cool.
Wisdom's
Well, one of them for me would be that uh, each proverb gives wisdom from a certain angle, so it's circumstantial. It's meant to be applied to certain circumstances. You can't just apply it as a blanket promise.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good. All right, Rich, you're number one.
Um, oh, I had it and now it's just slipped away. Oh man, it was a good one too, and I can't think of it now. Just the like weighing your consequences with
Oh,
by your decisions, and the way that like kind of the general principle that if you live in the way that God um suggests, then things will go well for you for the most
yep,
part. I
yep.
mean, I know
Well,
it's not a promise, but that's something I've said for a long time. If you apply biblical principles, then most likely things will go well.
yeah,
I
sure.
wouldn't, it's not the prosperity gospel, but if you follow God's instructions, then you'll prosper. You
Yeah,
may not have
yeah.
a jet and you know private helicopter, but you'll probably do pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll navigate life well, and yeah, what you both said is very true. There's always consequences. We could have talked more about that in Proverbs for sure, because a number of the Proverbs do tell you what the consequences are. Especially we didn't go over some Proverb 1, but that's a huge list of
Mhm.
consequences for going after the wrong things. All right, Grant number two.
Yeah, the other thing I think about is, uh, there was that phrase you'd mentioned that basically, following the wisdom of Proverbs leads to harmony in life.
Mm.
So that was something I remember. It just that's kind of the uh, really prospering, living with harmony in life. It's like when you're living consistent with God's values. I think about the fact that like you can sleep at night. You know
Yeah,
what I
that's
mean? Like
yeah,
there's a peace that comes with that. So
right. Oh yeah, it does say, he gives to, his people even in their sleep. So, I think that's Psalms more than Proverbs, but you're absolutely right. You don't have to worry about, who's knocking on the door, so to speak, and what's going to happen, looking over your shoulder. Um, Rich, what about you? Second one.
Um, one thing that I took away from Proverbs, not necessarily, from this class, but just I've read Proverbs a lot, and just the overall value of wisdom, and something that I pray for often is insight and understanding of of the scriptures, of God's ways, of, you know, just in general.
Mhm.
So just kind of the overall value of wisdom and of understanding and insight, and it says it's more valuable than
Mhm.
gold and silver, because I think it affects every area of your life. It affects your relationships, it affects your
Mhm.
work life, it affects your financial decisions. So it's like, that reminds me of Solomon. He prayed for great wisdom, and everything else that he could have ever desired came with that.
Right. Yep. Yeah, good point.
Or as a
And
result of that.
no, I think you're 100% right, but also, we have to maintain wisdom because Solomon lost it. It's not wise to marry 1,000 women. That's what we'll look at, in
My
2 weeks when we
brother
look
could
at
tell you
so.
that.
Yeah, it's not, it's just simply not wise. So there's an issue. So wisdom is practicing that. Um, so all right, so let's change topics a little bit. What are you guys thinking research paper? It's supposed to be due next week, week 7. This is week 6. So what are we
oh,
thinking?
I thought correct me if I'm wrong. I thought the due date said
Yeah, I thought it was like the
May
third or something.
3rd.
Oh, okay. Maybe I made a mistake then. Okay. I just looked at the week and on the website it said week 7.
Oh, I mean, I'm cool to look into more topics, but is it okay to keep that May 3rd date?
Let's see. Third, fourth, second, two. Oh, May 3rd. Okay, it's just in week 7. Okay. All right. So, yeah, May 3rd is still a week, about 10 days away. So,
Um,
so you
Uh,
guys thinking of anything?
what about a contrast between wisdom and folly, or righteous and wicked?
In what way are
Um,
you thinking?
I guess from Proverbs, and just contrast the two.
You could do it.
Uh,
So that would be a biblical theology of the wicked and righteous. So you would go through all of Proverbs and say, okay, this is what Proverbs says about the wicked and righteous. That would be legitimate,
okay.
something like that. So you would, biblical theology always starts with the text. So you would go through and read through all Proverbs and make a list. Hey, what is, everything the righteous, everything the wicked. And then you would categorize those and group them together as they can be grouped together. That could be pretty interesting. That could
Yeah.
be interesting study.
Okay.
Yeah, so you want to do it again. I don't. There's not much instruction, but I do want at least 5 resources. 5 commentaries. Or 3 commentaries and journal articles. So give yourself at least 5 um, to do that, to do a good job. And there's a lot written on Proverbs, and there are probably even some journal articles on righteous and wicked.
Okay.
So yeah, good job, Grant. What are you thinking?
Yeah, just a couple questions real quick. So, is it okay then to do like to have the sources all be commentaries, or do you need a few journal articles in there?
And it depends what it depends what your research is. If your
Okay.
research may lend itself to journal articles, that's fine. If it doesn't,
Mm.
commentaries are fine.
And then just so I'm squared away, we are going with the May 3rd due date, or
Yeah,
did you
go
want
with
it
the May
earlier?
3rd. Yep, May 3rd.
Okay. I'm kind of debating between two. So I kind of you have to let me know what you think of this. I kind of interpreted God's response to Job's friends is actually, and not responding to Elihu, actually as an affirmation of the theology expressed by Elihu on
Mhm.
suffering. I know some would disagree with me on that, but I thought of maybe doing, theology of suffering according to Elihu, as a possible one.
Yeah, you want to be careful there because you want to confirm first that he's got the right idea. Um,
True.
but if you wanted to tackle, is Elihu right or wrong? There's some, bandwidth to do that. 10 pages, you probably could cover it in 10 pages. And you could probably get, 6 commentaries, 3 to say yes and 3 to say no. So you'd have to decide on that, but that would be a legitimate um, topic to be able to handle.
And I suppose I could also maybe even make a critique where I'm going, I affirm a majority of his theology throughout the book, but here's, an area where he seems to stray, maybe. I don't know. Is that
Yeah, I
a
mean, the difficulty with all of the theology of all the friends, right, is sometimes they're right. The
right,
difficulty was that they had misapplied it to Job. And that's what that
right,
retribution theology will do. It allow a misapplication for it. So it's really difficult to say they're wrong. You'd have to say, and again, you point this out in Proverbs, they're wrong in this situation. If they
sure,
were talking to a wicked person, hey, they would not be wrong.
right,
But then again, it's hard to say
hmm,
this is that it's always God's discipline.
right.
So
Maybe broaden it to his friends
yeah, you
almost.
want
Would
to be
that be
careful
a
there.
better?
The 10 pages, I think I would go narrow more than broad. Um,
Okay.
what else are you thinking?
Well, with that one, a part of me was also thinking too, just a theology, God's purpose for suffering in the life of Job, and kind of, I don't know, might be kind of connected with that one. So, kind of really focusing that verse where it talks about how God opens the ears of the righteous. So, kind of the idea that suffering for those who are saved is actually meant to sanctify us and is ultimately for our good. So that could also be a version of that one. The other one I was going to think of is maybe attempting to find a few unifying principles of Ecclesiastes to almost try to uh, um, basically, if you had to summarize for a layperson the main thesis points, here's what Ecclesiastes is about.
Yeah, you could do that. There's enough written on Ecclesiastes. The difficulty with your conclusion on Job is, as much as I'm aware, the book of Job never states what you just stated about sanctification. You're bringing in New Testament theology into that because Job really never knows why. He never knew what hit him. So you're going to have to say, well, Job realized at the end why what God was doing. Mm-mm. Because remember, what's at stake here is this bet between God and the devil, which we'll go over today. So I know what we want to do with Job. We want to put him in Job, in Romans 8. All things happen daily for good. The difficulty is God never tells Job that. So how would you draw that conclusion from Job itself?
I guess the conclusion from that would be because it's true of all believers. And if we affirm Job as a believer, then wouldn't that also be true for Job? I kind of think of James talking about Job waiting patiently for his reward, essentially.
All we hear, all we see, all James says is we've heard of the endurance of Job is that he endured. We don't know the reason why Job endured. So I want to be careful. I want to be careful that we read too much into the book. Because if we read too much into the book, then the book becomes it becomes an Old Testament of Romans 8. And it doesn't state that. So I want to be real careful that we let Romans dictate it. And you're trying to bring in. Now, I do believe Job does show a reason why believers suffer, but that's because of the devil. So that's a legitimate say. That's the one thing that Job does do for us. If you take it right from the book, Job introduces one aspect of suffering that the New Testament even talks about is, by the devil, that he's not responsible for it. So that's definitely clear. But how that works out, we don't necessarily see that for, glory of God. Now, we can surmise that it's for the glory of God because Job, depending on what your position is, Job never curses God. So Satan is not proved correct. And for me, that's the gist of the whole book. So think about it. I think you're on to either way. Ecclesiastes is neat too. That's definitely needs some work for people. So that's an opportunity. Just email me. I would suggest you guys do it earlier this week. Trey, we're just talking about your projects that you want to do. They're coming up. It's May 3rd. So do you have any ideas?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I was kind of struggling through thinking of a topic, but I was thinking after I read a line in a commentary, but maybe trying to do something about the format and sort of outline of romance that Song of Solomon gives, and then compare that to what that, what Israel might look like at the time, what the culture might have been like, and why the book was necessary, if that makes sense.
What commentary were you reading?
I believe it was either a popular survey of the Old Testament by Norman Geisler or Through the Bible by Vernon McGee. Was one of those two.
Yeah, both of those are really old. They'll be outdated on the song. So scholarship has moved well past those guys on the song. So, I mean, I appreciate what you've done in the song. If you take a look, I have a book out on the song. So I do give somewhat of an outline of it. So that might help you. Longman has done some work on the song, although he sees it as desperate, different poems instead of one song. But there's a ton of people, writing on the song, so that you would have to do a lot of contemporary research. Vernon McGee is not academic. He's more of a popular speaker like Wiersbe. So, and also, guys, when talking about it, I was just looking over your paper. Stay away from Jameson as a source in your work. I know Logos has Robert Jameson. That's that's an over 100-year-old commentary, even though the copyright is 1997. So make sure you look at anything that says Logos copyrighted. It could be a reprint, and make sure you check the original date because you're not getting the most updated research if you're using Jameson. Same thing, Wiersbe, he's very old. He's not even academic. You really want to stay with strong academics. Word Biblical Commentary, Expositor's Biblical Commentary, American Commentary, those ones that are series are much better than some that are even in Logos. Again, that's the downside of Logos. Just because in Logos doesn't mean it's a good commentary. Okay. And then you have to check because there's some that for the song, they'll take an allegorical meaning. They may apply, but when it comes to the application, they'll take an allegorical meaning. So you have to really read carefully. So I would suggest you think about it this week and get me, let me okay something by Friday, because that would give you about a week to get your paper done if we're looking at May 3rd as that. That was May 3rd, right? We said? Yeah, so if you get it by Friday, that would give you about, 8 to 9 days to do the project. So let's get it by Friday so I can look at it and get it back to you. Sound like a plan? All right. All right, Trey, the question I asked the other guys, your top 2 takeaways from our study in the Proverbs.
Funny enough, the short and pithy quote
Okay.
was one I actually used when I was teaching the young adults group about it. And then the other thing that comes to mind is the fact that they're general rules and not hard promises.
Right.
Split those things.
Right. Yeah, because that's going to become an issue, especially if you're dealing with, there's one famous proverb, train up a child in the way he should go. When he was old, he won't depart from it. A number of parents will take that and they'll come to you and say, God, let me down. And the way you have to deal with that proverb is to say it's a guideline, not a promise. And it doesn't say what the child's response will be. It's motivating you to do it, because there's a better chance that if you don't train your child, then he'll go his own way. That's for sure, without training. But even with training, that's not the whole story. Your child still has to make decisions. So this is where the genre of the proverb helps you answer that question with grieving parents, because that'll be a tough one to deal with, where parents say, God let me down. Here's a promise. And I think that's where the genre of Proverbs helps us a lot. Questions, comments? All right, makes sense. We can move forward then. We're all on the same page. All right, so now we move to an overview. We're just going to do an overview quickly before we move into the book of Job. This is non-proverbial, and that makes perfect sense, right? Because it's not Proverbs. So it's no non-proverbial because it's not Proverbs, number one, but also because it's not in those pithy statements. All right, we know Job, Song, Ecclesiastes, even though they have parallelism there, they're not short, pithy statements, especially Job and Song and Ecclesiastes. Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song, they're known as wisdom literature, okay? Proverbs is considered proverbial wisdom because it's Proverbs based, and the rest are non-proverbial wisdom. And we said it, wisdom literature is designed by God to help a person navigate life wisely, to live in fear of God. Because remember, we said that in Proverbs 1, the beginning of knowledge is the fear of God. So navigating life well means to chart the course of your life by the principles established by the Creator himself. So that when we live wisely, we're saying, hey, we recognize that God created. Now that's important, especially in our day and age, because if you don't believe in a creator, how are you going to live? What's your basic basis of ethics? The golden rule? Yeah. But based on what? See, I think evolution really has a problem when it comes to ethics, because there's no basis of ethics. It's really, the survival of the fittest. Wisdom says, oh, God is creator, so we're going to order our life. And he has already created an order that we see in Proverbs. So Zuck's going to remind us an individual life is successful as he directs his life in accordance with God's divine design, his plan for the world. Seeing God's moral order, sensing from divine revelation what God desires and his plan for mankind, one is then challenged by wisdom literature to connect his life in line with those principles established by the Creator. So we sense from divine revelation what God desires. And it's Zook could even went farther and said, no, this is exactly what God wants life to do, and it's successful. And Grant, you mentioned this beginning, and so did you, Richard. We want to be successful in life. Now, success is different for a number of people, right? Is it health, wealth, and prosperity? Something is just, hey, I want to please God, is being successful. So the question is, all right, so that's wisdom literature. That's not just Proverbs, that's all of wisdom literature. So how does the wisdom literature of Job enable a man to navigate life well? It's not written in the same pithy, memorable statements, nor does it cover the same range of life situations. So how does Job fit in? How does the wisdom literature of Ecclesiastes enable a man to navigate life well? Grant and I were talking before, the class started. Did you guys struggle with an outline of Ecclesiastes? Yeah, if you didn't struggle with an outline of Ecclesiastes, something's wrong, because it's probably the most notorious book to outline, as we'll talk about. And then how does the wisdom literature of the song, with his rich erotic metaphors, enable a man to navigate life well? So, these are questions that we'll answer, but we're rest assured that each one of these books demonstrates to men and women to navigate life well by applying wisdom in each one of these situations. And the channel of wisdom in these books is not clearly marked as Proverbs, but it's there. It takes some diligent study to mark the channels of how these books function. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. So just some general guidelines we want to talk about. So this is going to become more important as we talk about Job. You got to be able to understand the specific subgenres. So what's the genre of Job? You've all read Job. You've read, books on him, your textbook. What's the genre of Job?
Wisdom poetry.
All right, poetry. Someone else. What's the problem with Grant's summary, that right there?
I don't know. It seems more narrative to me.
All right, what's wrong with Richard's statement? Hopefully, Trey, you're going to be able to navigate between the two of these guys.
Well, it kind of has both.
Yes.
Yeah.
It has
poetic narrative.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's what we want to say. But you have to recognize, and we'll get into it, what's the purpose for the narrative and what's the purpose for the poetry. And there is a direct purpose for it. All right, so chapter 1 and 2 are narrative. Chapter 3 through 27, dialogue. Chapter 28 to 31 is almost a soliloquy. Although 28, I think, is more written soliloquy than dialogue. Then you have more dialogue, 32 through 37. And then 38 to 42, dialogue, divine dialogue. Then 42 mostly ends in narrative. Why? And that's what we're going to have to answer the question when we get into the book of Job today. Also, what's the genre of the song? What's the genre of the song?
So it's kind of like a song, somewhat more poetic. So it's
Okay. How does the book identify itself?
as a song.
Yeah, it's a song. It's a song. It's a sheer. So, some suggest that maybe it was accompanied by music. We're not sure. All we have is the words. But any of you guys musical, how would you like to sing 8 chapters of that? Okay, that would be a tough, tough book to sing, so to speak. But there's 8 chapters. All right. So we want to be able to understand the genre. Ecclesiastes is mind-boggling. Okay, some put it as poetry lines. The BHS, some Hebrew or Hebrew Bibles don't necessarily put it as poetry. So that becomes problematic. Um, so we have to recognize too the limits of wisdom literature. Uh, let me see if I can jump to this one. Eliphaz, the Teman answered, if one ventures a word with you, will you become impatient? But who can refrain from speaking? Behold, you have admonished many, and you have strengthened weak hands. Your words have helped the tottering to stand. You have strengthened feeble knees, but now it has come to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you're dismayed. Is not the fear of God your confidence? Now, hear the wisdom there, right? And the integrity of your ways, your hope. Remember now, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the upright ever destroyed? According to what I've seen, those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble harvest it. What's right and what's wrong with this statement?
I think, like you were mentioning earlier, what's right is that there are biblical principles behind what he's saying, but he's applying it as a blanket statement to every circumstance.
Yeah, and to Job's circumstances. So that's we have to recognize the limits of wisdom literature. And I think you said it earlier, Grant, that there's circumstances, right? It's true in this circumstance. So what Eliphaz is saying is not necessarily wrong. However, he's wrong in the way he's applying to Job, because, is not the fear of God your confidence? Yes, it is. Then remember now, whoever perished being innocent. Well, wait a minute. Job is innocent because in chapter 1 and 2, God said he was innocent. So that is extremely important. So we have to recognize the limits of wisdom literature. Just because a book is talking about wisdom, it may not turn the diamond in all different directions. Even the song doesn't turn the diamond in all different directions. And we have to be okay with that. I mean, the song doesn't talk about marriage. It assumes marriage, doesn't talk about it. So we have to recognize the limits of wisdom literature. You have to always interpret wisdom teaching in light of the context. All right. This becomes important because we want to be careful. Job opened his mouth in chapter 3, verse 1. After Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. Let the day perish in which I was born, the night in which said a boy was conceived. May the dark day be darkness. Let not God care for it, nor light shine upon it. Let darkness and black gloom claim it. Let a cloud settle over it. Let the darkness of the day terrify it. Okay. I mean, this is fairly fairly strong language, but we have to understand what happened in chapter 1 and chapter 2. We always like to take the New Testament. We can put those things on a plaque, those verses that stand by themselves. Sometimes in the wisdom literature, we can't necessarily do that because we have to take the entire context together. Also in here, always interpret wisdom in light of the context. And I would say in the book as well as the canon itself. Where in the song does it say that the couple is married? And in chapter 1, it says, let him kiss me with the kiss of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Well, in chapter 1, verse 1, let's translate the Hebrew there a little bit better. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love making is better than wine. Love there is not just the emotion, it's the skill of love. So this is a girl that's acquainted with kisses, number 1, lovemaking, number 2, and wine. So she's not a Baptist, right? Because she has all 3. Where is she states she's married?
Um, I'm thinking of the later, was it chapter 5 where it describes the Solomon the groom's like arrival for the wedding festivities? I forget
Yeah,
which chapter.
chapter 3. Yeah,
Oh,
chapter
chapter
5.
3.
Right.
Okay.
That's if you see Solomon as the main lover. See, if you see Solomon as main lover, you're going to have a difficulty now. Which wife is this? And plus, chapter 8 is going to argue against that being his. But so my point is, you can't. They're not married. You can't. I'm sorry. Let me take that back. They are married, but the book never states it. But you would never have a book in the Jewish canon that would have them enjoying lovemaking the way they are without being married. It goes against the context of the canon. So that's why. But you're not wrong, Grant. That's why some would suggest Solomon, because they want to keep it in the context. They want to have marriage. So you have this courtship, marriage, post-marriage outline to the book. But most scholars have moved away from that now, because the book in chapter 1, verse 1 says, let him kiss me with the kiss of his mouth. You already have physical affection taking place, sexual affection taking place. And that's chapter 1. Chapter 2, it's even more explicit what they're doing. So you can't have marriage doesn't even show up. Solomon's marriage doesn't show up till chapter 3, and I think that's a different point.
So do you think they're just
Say that again. You
kind of
broke up.
similar when we talked about Lady Wisdom? Oh, sorry, what?
You broke up. Your statement didn't come through.
Oh, so do you think it's similar when we talked about Lady Wisdom being an ideal? Do you think in the Song of Songs it's also describing an ideal?
In a sense that the characters do not exist in history, yes. They're an ideal.
Got it. Okay.
Yes. So these are not real characters. These are a fiction that Solomon created to show what love is supposed to look like in a human relationship. So it's like holding up a mirror and say, does your marriage look like this? But it's not real people. And it's important that it's not real people because he doesn't want us to identify too closely with the people. So it becomes idealized. Yes. Yep. Great way of saying that. Yeah, we'll talk more in week 8 about the song specifically. But I want to use these examples to say, how should we interpret it? So context becomes important. Remember, too, that non-proverbial wisdom, I can even say proverbial wisdom, right, tends to be contradictory. So given to poles or reflective and prefers more indirect. I mean, Ecclesiastes 7, probably one of my favorite verses. It's better to go to a house of mourning than the house of feasting, because that's the end of every man, and the living take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter. I mean, how does sorrow better than laughter? Would you rather get news of a funeral than a party? Hey guys, what are you doing this weekend? Why don't you come to a funeral with me? Ever get that invite? But Solomon is saying it's better, and then he explains why. The mind of the wise is in the house of mourning, he says in verse 4. Because why? The living take it to heart. And that's important because we can't live as though we're always at a party. And he's simply saying, remember, reader, we all die, and we should live in light of the fact that we die. And we tend to be more reflective when we're at a party or at a funeral. When we're at a funeral. Because we may even think, hey, that could be me. Or what happens when that'll be me? Or you get older, you say, hey, that person was my age. That starts putting things in perspective. So we do have this, contradictory or given to polarity statements in it. Expect figurative language. All right. How beautiful you are, my darling. How beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves behind your hair. Well, veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats that have descended from Mount Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of newly shorn ewes which have come up from their washing, all of which bear twins, and not one of them has lost their young. Your lips like a scarlet thread, and your mouth is lovely. Your temples are like a slice of pomegranates behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built with rows of stones, on which are hung 1,000 shields, all the round shields of the mighty men. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of gazelles, which feed among the lilies. Until the cool of the day, when the shadows flee away, I will go my way to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. So what in the world is he talking about? Which one? Trey and Richard, you guys are
that's how
not
I'm going
married?
to respond to my dating app. I'm going to respond with that. See how
I
far
was
it gets me.
I was hoping you would say that, Richard, because if you're on your dating app and you get a date, I want you to say to her over the dinner table, my dear, your
hair is like a
eyes are
flock
like
of
doves,
goats.
which I think you'll get away with the first part. Your
Yeah.
eyes are like doves. I think she'll look at you a little bit funny, but she'll smile. When you say your hair is like a flock of goats, I don't know if
Yeah.
that's when she walks out.
Yeah. Your teeth are like a flock of newly shorn ewes. That's gold right there.
But what is he saying about her teeth?
They're white.
Yes.
They're healthy. I don't know.
They're white. And what about all of which bear twins? Not one has lost their young. Why is this line important?
She's not missing any teeth.
Yes,
They're
thank you, Trey.
fertile.
Because they had camels, they had donkeys, and they tend to kick. Can you imagine seeing a beautiful Israelite woman? You tell your dad and mom, hey, she really looks good. Why don't you go get her for me? And they go up to her and she demurs. She comes up to you and then she sees Richard and she smiles and she only has 2 teeth. What does Richard do? He may scream and
a lot
run.
of money at the dentist.
And I don't know if they have dentists back then, but I mean, they weren't probably doing fillings. Your neck is like the Tower of David, but notice that simile. What is this? Built with rows of stone on which 1,000 shields. What's happening there?
Probably jewelry.
Yes, exactly. Probably a size of quarters, linked together, and probably covered her chest, over her breast, on top of her breast. Remember, they didn't have, they had, where were they going to keep their wealth? Women tend to wear it. So that could have been her wealth that she was projecting. And then we get down here, your 2 breasts are like fawns, twins of gazelles. Scholars have, beat themselves up trying to figure out what that simile is. How is her 2 breasts like twins of gazelles? Okay, we have 2 breasts. We know that. So they're twins, but which feed among the lilies. Now, when I get into this, I think I have an idea because this will come back again in chapter 5 without this saying. But until the cool of the day when the shadows weep, I'll go to my mountain of myrrh and my hill of frankincense. Well, what is that referring to? Her 2 breasts, hills and mountains. So you have to be able to handle this figurative language and explain it. Now, one question we have to answer in 2 weeks is, right, how do you handle bellies, navels, and breasts from the pulpit on a Sunday morning for the song? All right. So you guys are in my church. I want you to preach on the song this Sunday. How are you going to do it?
I might be sick that day.
I appreciate your honesty. Yeah, because it's tough. How do we handle that? And we'll chat about that. No, not how do we handle breasts. We just, handle bellies, but how do we preach so we have to, you see, even how you talk about it, we just miss it. In class, it's been much better because at least I could heard your laughter. Now with everything off, I can't hear anything. So I'm just assuming. This is how some of our Reformed friends see us interpreting the song. So you have flocks of goats coming down, You have a neck like the tower. You have Pooh Bear here, you're dripping honey. That's not what we mean by figurative language or literal language. We know that this is not true, that we do have figurative language that's non-literal without being silly, so to speak. One thing, let's go back to the song here. As much as your hair is like a flock of goats, Richard would not use this on his dating app. Why?
Different culture.
Yeah. And that's one thing we could say too, is that these compliments are culturally sensitive. And we may not be able to understand all of them, but we do know they're all positive. There are some feminist scholars that want to disagree with me and say Solomon is the lover's making fun of his bride. I disagree wholeheartedly. These are positive because he starts off with what? Yape, how beautiful you are. And matter of fact, he'll go right through chapter 4 and he'll get down to the end of the section after he describes her and says how beautiful you are. So he wraps it between these two expressions of how beautiful you are. And notice his words for her, my darling. Okay. But your hair's like a flock of goats probably does not engender the compliment we would want today. Although it's probably positive, it's probably talking about her hair is gleaming, that had descended from Gilead. It's probably her black hair and it's probably waving because like flocks would come down the Mount of Gilead, it would be flowing. So it would be a really good compliment. Richard, please don't use this. Or if you do use this, you have to tell us how it goes. You have to tell us.
I don't know. It might go over all right in a country setting.
I said she looked like a goat and she was mad.
Have you ever heard that saying? You look better than a new set of snow tires.
I haven't heard that one, but thanks. As much as we're studying it, we have to heed the admonition of wisdom, guys. Teaching wisdom applies to life. And that's, whether it's we are in seminary, it's no good having wisdom in our head and not using in life. A lot of Proverbs talks about adultery. Do you know what age group is more susceptible now to adultery? What age group? Those over 60. Yeah, you're surprised, Grant, but it is. And again, it's because you have to finish well, right? But if you look at the number of people like Ravi Zachariah, Philip Yancey and others, they're well into their 60s. Pastors that have well-established ministries. It's not just the young guys like you that have issues. And this is where, heed the admonition to live life wisely with the wife of your youth. That's what Proverbs 5 is talking about. And guys like my age kind of forget those admonitions. Recognize the poetic quality of it. So let's go here. This is Job. Why is light given to him who suffers, and life to the bitter of soul, who long for death, but there is none, who dig for it more for the hidden treasures, who rejoice greatly, they exult when they find the grave. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden and whom's God hedged in? What's he saying here?
I think he's saying that basically death would be a mercy, and basically why does God let me linger on living if I'm going to suffer so bad?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So that's number one. We'll keep that in mind, Greg. How many different literary devices do we see here? Just shout out some.
There's some metaphor in there.
Where's the metaphor, Troy?
Is it, or might be the wrong term. The life to the bitter of soul. Like, how can a soul be bitter?
Okay. Yeah, I would. Yeah, probably metonymy there, but light might be a metaphor for life for sure. You have rhetorical questions, right? Look at, wise like given, wise like given, a repetition, whom God has hedged in. All that to say, when we're talking about these poetic devices, this is really, as much as these are a few verses, this is 3 verses, 4 verses, it's only saying the same thing. And it's exactly what Grant said. Hey, if this is my life, why can't I not die? Now, it's important to recognize whom God had sinned, which is not accurate. God is not the one who's hedged in. Who's hedged in? Satan. But Job doesn't know that. And that's part of the book. Okay, recognize poetic quality. Oh, one thing I also want to say too is recognize that the outline, the poetic quality, which we just talked about, but also the book may not be linear. Job has a clear beginning, clear middle, clear end. Ecclesiastes, clear beginning, chapter 1 is actually true. Clear conclusion, chapter 12, right? So Grant, we agree on that? Chapter 1 is introduction, chapter 12 is conclusion, right?
Yep.
Then what happens from chapter 2 to chapter 11? What is the central motif?
It's confusing, but part of me, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think maybe the unifying principle is that the point is not to figure all of it out, but to simply trust God with all the confusion regardless.
Yeah, some have suggested that the book is no clear outline because that life doesn't have a clear outline. Because, we can't go from point A to point B real clearly. So I would suggest that possibly that's why the book doesn't. It kind of goes up and down and back on itself and then forward again. And it's really, I called it a muddle middle, but that's because I think life is like that. It does have, life has a myriad of question. And then in the middle, Solomon tests wisdom, pleasure, and work to see if any answers can answer the myriad question of life, which they cannot. And it's because of this that you have this frustration that I think builds even with the outline of the book. And the frustration is answered, Grant, with exactly what you said is what? Even in the midst of frustration, what's the bottom line? Fear God. Even when you can't figure life out, fear God. And Ecclesiastes is extremely important in contrast to Proverbs. Why? What's true of Proverbs versus Ecclesiastes?
I think because Proverbs is kind of, the emphasis is on rewards and blessings in this life and the temporal, and Ecclesiastes gives the eternal perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, but eternity is never mentioned in the book. It's simply trust God now. Now, it does give a little bit about trust God before it's too late, but that kind of narrows the book back down to life and not eternity. And there's not a real strong positive statement about the hereafter. So we got to be careful. That's not unusual what you're saying, but I think it doesn't do justice to the book as much as it says, hey, life is frustrating. Simply trust God where we're at it because it'll be better with us. But it doesn't say how it's going to be better.
Do you think it could relate to the gospel eternity in the heart of man, or would you say that more goes along with the frustration of not having the answers?
I think it goes along with the frustration not having the answers because that eternity doesn't necessarily tell us what the eternal will be. It's just that he's built us for something past this life, but that we're not aware of. but we are to live in light of that, because that's what the verse I just shared with. It's better to go house of mourning. Why? I think the key there is not, it's death for sure, but it's that we're simply going to meet God, not the way afterward. So it's to live life well to meet God. I can go that far in the book. I think I bring too much else in if I go too far and say this has an eternal perspective. But you're not wrong in the sense that, hey, other scholars have said it. I just don't disagree. I disagree with those other scholars because I think we're bringing other theology in. What I'm trying to do in our class is get us to think about the book itself in very tight structures. I'm not doing a biblical theology of the entire Old Testament to show where each book fits in. I've written a book with my colleagues that did that. But what I'm trying to get us to first see is I want to keep that book in a box, because if we keep the book in a box, we'll know how to apply that book in our contemporary settings. And it doesn't always sound like Romans or sounds like a New Testament book, because I think each one of these books has a very special contribution to make to wisdom literature. So I want to be very careful how we do it. And as much as there might be an afterlife in the proverbial wisdom, it doesn't come across real clearly as much as the New Testament. All right. What I was looking for, the difference between Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, is Proverbs got these fixed formulas, right? Do this, X happens. Ecclesiastes has do this, and we have no idea what will happen. It could go one or two ways, right? The rich can get richer even in their wickedness. All right. Richard, your paper on Proverbs would look different in Ecclesiastes between the righteous and the wicked, because in Proverbs we can almost be assured, right, that the wicked are always going to suffer. In Ecclesiastes, what's going to happen to the wicked? Yeah, there are some negative, but there's also some, they may extend their life in their wickedness. So there's not that complete this for that, so to speak. Recognize the outline. That's where we are. I'm not going to talk about the song right now. We'll save that for week 8. Again, don't go beyond the wisdom of the text. The point in answering this question is, we think of Job's question of undeserved innocent suffering. Why does the innocent suffer? Job does not answer that question specifically. He gives us one bit of it. The innocent suffer when there's a test between God and Satan. That's all we know. It doesn't give us anything more than that. It doesn't tell us about sin suffering. We suffer because of our own sin. That'd be another proverb book, right? Proverbs does talk about, or Psalms talks about, Psalm 32, my bones waxed away when I didn't confess my sin. So I want to make sure that we're not doing too much with the book. Note to character, we'll do that in a few minutes with the book. All right, so who's the author of Job? Let's get into the book of Job. Who's the author of Job? Thanks, Trey. I appreciate the
The Holy Spirit.
Thank you. Are you guys okay with that?
The author of Job is the one who wrote it.
Oh, man. Thanks, Rich. Are you guys okay with the anonymity? All right. Some are not. In 20 years ago, people were fighting for who wrote the book of Job. Okay. And really, God could have told us, and he decided not to. So I always tell people, hey, let's respect God when he says, this. So the name of the author of Job is Lost Forever. I don't know if it's lost forever as much as it was never given. Okay. Rarely has history left such a literary genius unnamed and unknown as to the circumstances. And I do agree with this. Okay. It's a literary genius who wrote this book. All right. I would suggest, although some might have suggested Elihu, others have suggested Job himself. I could suggest Solomon. Okay. And again, I'm not going to go to the mat, not going to go to the wall for this. But I do think that Solomon may have wrote this because all of the wisdom literature is written by Solomon. So there is a chance, and I would suggest that Job is I don't want to say a correction, but Job is the balance to Deuteronomy 28 to 32. Because in one sense, Deuteronomy 20 to 32 is wisdom literature about choosing the right way and choosing the wrong way. Okay, if you choose God's way, you'll be blessed. If you choose the wrong way, you'll be cursed. What explains those exceptions in life to Deuteronomy? Because really, Deuteronomy does sound like wealth, health, and prosperity gospel. It doesn't say, there's no middle ground. What explains the middle ground? Job explains the middle ground, that the innocent may suffer if God allows it. So I would suggest that, Deuteronomy is written to the nation, that this is how God's going to deal with the nation. Job is written to the individual, that sometimes we suffer, and it may be because it has nothing to do with us. And it may be because we're still righteous, and that'll come up in chapter 1 of the book, and that's critical. But so I would argue for, not that I'm going to argue, I would just lightly suggest Solomon, but I can't prove it. All I can say is the rest of the wisdom books are proven by Solomon. And I do think that it is a balance. Fortress Press wants to go so far as say it's a correction, Deuteronomy. I don't want to say it's a correction, but I do think it's the other side of the coin to retribution theology. And that is definitely a correction for that. If we cannot name an author, we cannot name a date of composition. Okay. Now remember, the date of setting is different than the date of composition. Okay. You guys can, any of you guys writers, anybody writing a novel right now? Trey, are you writing a fiction novel?
Yeah.
What's your setting?
Mostly medieval.
Oh, okay. So you mind if I use that as an example then?
They're good.
Okay. So Trey's writing a medieval fiction. When is Trey writing? 2026, right? But he's going to make his book sound like it's written when? Medieval. So setting is not necessarily a good indicator of authorship. Now let's say Trey, he's a very talented writer. People are going to read his work and they're going to say, oh, we just unearthed a medieval text. He could pour tea on it, make it look old, right? And people are going to say, we found this manuscript. Well, he can make it look that way, but the reality is it's written in 2026. Same thing about Job. Just because it's written during the patriarchal time, maybe even pre-Abraham, it's definitely during the patriarchs at some point, because the way chapter 1 is laid out in the sense of who's around, how they measure wealth. All right, question, comments?
Just wanted to say I appreciate you for challenging us to think critically. It's good practice. So thank you. I appreciate that.
What did I say that made us think critically?
I mean, in general, like you challenge the ways we think about the text.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I hope to do, because commentaries are not always going to help you. And I don't want you to just read a commentary and just take what they say, because you can pick up another commentary and you could agree with them. So I want you to be able to understand the books for yourself, at least at the big picture view, so that when we come down, it helps us. So I appreciate you guys being open because, you know, you don't want to fight with authorship, and I would agree 100%. So we know the setting is patriarchal. All right, so data composition is left open. We don't know. Some even said Moses could have written it, which possibly because they want to say during the time of Moses. I just don't think so because of the wisdom corpus at that point. Although, and again, it could have fit any time. It could be the oldest book, or it could fit in the middle of Israel's canon. All right, some things that we have to, some key issues in Job. We have to recognize the prose and poetic section, which we'll get to. Identify the various speakers in the cycle. You know, this is key to the outline of the book. The poetic features, especially difficult Hebrew. Chapter 28 of Job may be the most difficult Hebrew in the entire Bible. It does answer the question, you know, why does man worship God? We have to understand retribution theology. It introduces us really to the work of Satan. And also the last chapters introduce us to appreciate God's wisdom to order the entire universe. All right, so if you want a brief outline, just one level, this is really how you can do it. Although it looks like I left out a section right here. All right, so introduction, chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 3 has to be by itself because this is Job's lament. Then, really 4 through 27, you have 3 cycles that get increasingly hostile to Job as they get deeper. Then you have 28 to 32, 28 to 31, which is a soliloquy by Job after Job 28, which I think Job 28 is the narrator's response to wisdom. Then you have Elihu's response. Hey, you're all wrong. Then you got God's divine science quiz, and then God restores. This is a bugaboo. Answer the question, what was God's purpose in restoring Job? So we'll get to that in a minute. All right, so I say it this way. What's the purpose of the book of Job? The book of Job tells of a divine wager between God and Satan in heaven. The wager centers on Satan's accusation, will Job serve God for nothing? After Job loses his children, his wealth, and his health, his 3 friends attempt to comfort him by alternately explaining that he's a sinner who needs to repent. Job counters each of the arguments with his innocence, and in the process calls God to give account of his doings in life. Eventually, God condescends and answers Job, but the answers is not what Job expected. God simply gave Job a 2-part science quiz that demonstrated God could be trusted to order a man's life. The purpose of the book is to give to the sufferer a choice, either to lower his view of God, which means to question or complain about God, or to raise his or her faith to trust God even when God is silent and pain is so intense. So that's my subject purpose statement to the book. So let's go a little bit through. So if you have your Bibles, you know, open those to Job chapter 1. So Job chapter 1 is extremely important because it's going to set the stage for the rest of the book. And notice it is set out as narrative. And we'll get to that in a moment. So there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. that man was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. What makes that statement in verse 1 so vitally important to the rest of the book? This verse is key.
Well, nobody can go back and
Gives
argue
it the
like, no, he
context.
wasn't righteous.
What's that, Trey?
Sorry, nobody can go back later on and be like, well, clearly he was still sinful in some way, or he was unrighteous in some way. So they can't justify the suffering he's going through by trying to claim he, was sinful in some way.
All right, good. Yeah. Anyone else?
I just thought that it kind of clarifies the context of the dialogue.
In which way?
Because if you don't know this before the dialogue, then you could make an argument, well, that his friends must be right.
Okay.
Like there's no contrast, or there's no nothing saying that they're not right.
Okay. Right. You're on the same page as Trey. It's, not so much background as much. Remember, all we're introduced to here is the man, where he lives, Uz. We're mentioning his name, Job, and his character. And it's blameless, upright, fearing God, turning away. So there's a fourfold characteristic of who this man is. And he's blameless, not perfect, but blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. So he's a wise man because we know he's fearing God. All right. So that's important. And it's exactly what Trey says, is nobody can say he deserves what he's going to get. So what does verses 2 through 5 show in chapter 1?
It shows that he's a man of God who loves his children, and he's wealthy, but he loves his children, and that's why he makes sacrifices on their behalf.
Okay, it shows that he's righteous. It shows he's upright because he cares about the spirituality of his kids of walking before God. So really, 2 through 5 show in real life that this man is who the narrator says he is. Now, remember, guys, this book is written, it's not acted out. It's written so well that we think it's taking place in real time. But actually, the book was written after these things happened to Job, because the narrator knows at the very end that Job is giving everything back. But it seems like it's unfolding in front of us. But remember, this is a written work, not a verbal work. And that's going to become important for chapter 28. So everything is going to add to this argument. So the first argument is, who is this man? Oh, he's blameless. Show me that he's blameless. Well, that's verses 2 through 5. And even his wealth does show he's blameless, because it is a benefit, i.e., I could say a blessing, of walking with God. Because this man, he fears God, right? He's the greatest, he's wisest. So we would expect this man to prosper, because that's what Proverbs talks about, right? The man who fears God will prosper. We've all talked about that before, that there's a prospering of walking with God in wisdom. So, verse 5. Oh, and notice 7 sons and 3 daughters. Perfect number, right? You wanted sons to carry out the name. So 7 sons, man, you can't get any richer than that. 3 daughters is an addition to that. And then 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. I mean, the man, had UPS and FedEx combined. Okay, because that's exactly what the camels were used for. He would rent them out. And, he would be able to send it. He would add transportation service. Verse 4, and his sons used to go hold a feast in the house of each day. They sent invite their. So they have a close family, for sure. Even though mom and dad aren't invited, which I think is a slight. And I'm saying, hey, how come mom and dad weren't invited? But that's not part of the narrator's story. But he would, after a year, say, perhaps my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually. So continually means every year after the cycle of birthdays, he would take care of acting literally as the priest for his children. And this is pre-law, so there is no restriction on who would go before God at this point. All of verses 1 through 5 is happening where? Where's this all taking place? In the land of Uz, which is on earth. All right, because we have to understand that this place, Uz, okay, Middle East, is on earth, because the next verse now is going to be in heaven. And we have to understand that there's two spheres that this drama is playing out on. And in one sense, it is a drama. So again, we have to know too that verse 3 is important, not just because of his wealth, but because of the accusation that Satan is going to bring against the man. Why is Job so wealthy? This is going to become important. So there was a day, any day, when the sons of God, sons of God, probably a term for angels, came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan also came. So it does show, you get some theology of Satan here, right? This sounds like it's a military arrangement, okay? They're called, they have to come. So all the angels have to come. And the Lord seems to center on Satan and says, and Yahweh said to Satan, from where do you come? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from roaming about the earth and walking around it. Notice Satan gives this teenage answer. Okay, Richard's probably familiar. Hey, what are you doing? Nothing. And where you been? Nowhere. This is Satan's answer is teenage-ish. He goes, I've been around on the earth. And then verse 8, and Yahweh said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless, upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. What does that verse do for us? What's the purpose of that verse?
Sorry, can you repeat the verse?
Sure. What's the purpose of verse 8?
One more time.
Yeah, what's the purpose of verse 8?
It gives the claim from verse 1 credibility.
In which way, Trey?
Because God is the one saying it now, not just man.
Right. Now, keep that in mind. We have to keep God, because this is going to come back in chapter 2. God says the same thing, but then it'll come back in chapter 38. And watch the change. See, this is something we have to keep in mind, how the book starts and how the book ends. So you're exactly right. How does we see the narrator, the author of the book, claim that Job is blameless, upright, fearing God? But now we hear right from Yahweh's own voice in heaven that Job is not aware of, that God considers him the same. That's high praise. Right? Now, this fearing God comes into play in the next verse. Then Satan answered Yahweh, does Job fear God for nothing? Here's your accusation. Circle this verse. Have you not hedged about him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hand, and his possessions have increased in the land. So Satan recognizes that all that Job has is a blessing from God. And there's no doubt about it. And I think Job recognizes it too. And this idea of hedged in, circle that word. Because I believe that that God has hedged Job in. He's protected him. He's built a hedge around him. Job is going to miss the point here because he's going to accuse God of hedging him in a negative, not a positive. Because in his suffering, Job's suffering is going to be very narrow. Because the book of Job expands it that there's a bigger picture that Job is not aware of. Job is not aware of necessarily Satan's activity in life and suffering. So that'll help us. So has God not made a hedge? And the answer is yes, he has. You have blessed the hands in his possessions. Verse 11, put forth your hand now, touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. There's not many adverbs in Hebrew. Surely, this is using the curse and curse. He will curse you, cursing you. I mean, this is making an impact. You have to circle this verse. If you write in your Bible, you have to circle because this is the key. This is the challenge. All right, so Trey's writing a medieval story. If he has knights in it, a knight would throw down his glove and pick up the challenge. He would challenge the other knight to a duel. All right, that's what Satan is throwing down. He's throwing down the gauntlet, and will God pick it up? And what does he say? Then Yahweh said to Satan, behold, all that he has is your power, only do not put forth your hand on him. So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. Now, you have to understand what's at stake here. So what's, in your mind, what's the wager? How do you understand the wager as you read through the book of Job?
Will Job turn on God if God's not blessing him or doing what's pleasing to Job? Or
Okay, good. Someone else. How do you understand this wager?
I think it's what Richard said, but on the flip side, if it's the opposite, like if he's being actively, suffering, harmed, whatever the case may be, he would then curse God. So go to the other extent. So go from praising God and blessing to suffering and cursing.
Okay. Grant, what's your position?
My position, I'm kind of stealing a little bit from what you said earlier, Dr. McGinniss, but I think the question or wager is the faith that Job is glorifying God with real?
Yeah, hold that question because I think that's underneath it for sure. I think you're right. I think you're right there. But right now, the wager is Satan believes that Job only worshiped God's why?
For prosperity.
For what God has done for him.
Yes. Now, guys, I don't want to jump to application right away, but this is the question we can ask ourselves. We can ask our audience. What motivates you to worship God? Is it only because of what we get? See, what Satan believes of you and of Job is that God for us is a divine vending machine. And if we put our coins of worship in that divine vending machine, and we push the button, we get out our can of soda, we get our candy bar, we're okay. What happens if we put our coins of worship in, our coins of obedience in, our coins of devotion in, and what happens if no soda comes out?
Throw it in.
Tested.
What's that, Grant?
I just said then it's tested.
Okay. Richard, what were you going to say?
I said, what happened? You said, what happens when you put your stuff in and you don't get the soda? Well, you throw a tantrum. I want my soda.
Thank you. I mean, what do? We look around, we see if anybody's looking, and what do? We beat the machine. Why? I want my soda. I put my coins in, I want my soda. True story. A guy walked into a drugstore, bought a soda in a vending machine in the foyer. The machine did not give his soda. He went up to the cashier and said, "Listen, I put my money in. The machine didn't give my soda." She said, "Sir, the machine's not ours." He said, "I want my money or I want my soda." "I'm sorry, sir. We have no control of the machine." So he calmly walked out. Then he drove his pickup truck through the front of the store into the vending machine. We get really upset if we put our coins in and don't get something out. Satan believes this of us and of Job. And guys, we have this kind of mentality even in the church today. When I was pastoring in New Jersey, I had a guy in my church call me and he said, "Hey, pastor, I was in a car accident this morning." I said, "Why are you calling me? Okay, are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, nothing happened. It's just my car's wrecked." "Okay." And I said, "Are you, you're fine?" "Yes." "Do you need anything?" "No, but I want to tell you why I was in a car wreck." I said, "Okay, why were you in a car wreck?" He said, "Because I didn't do my devotions this morning." That's retribution theology, guys. That's if I don't put my coins of worship in, something bad will happen. This is why the book of Job was written, because this Deuteronomy blessing and cursing is running through people's minds. And the author is balancing that. Go ahead, Richard.
Sorry, I've actually talked about that, how a lot of times in life we see things opposite for what they are. Like I had an experience in my life that most people would characterize as the worst, want something that's the worst thing that could happen to you. But I see it as the best thing that ever happened to me. And I think a lot of times we miss a lot of the true blessings that we have come through adversity and trial and even suffering. And I think we miss some of that,
Sure. But also, I think we have to be okay with, I may not see the blessing come out of the trial or the suffering. Job, as we read through the whole book, and we're not going to be able to read through the whole book, right? But as we get to the end of the book, Job never knew what hit him. And Job never reflects back and say, "Oh, I'm grateful for that happening." It was like, what in the world? Job never understood it. Now, we started the question last week, and I just want to go back a little bit. Job is a real person. That has to be true because of James. Now, I think it had to be true without James anyways, but James says you've heard of the patience of Job. So at least for James, Job becomes the epitome of patience. He has to be a real person. I mean, because if I could put Frodo Baggins, on the board and say, "Hey, Frodo can endure anything." Yeah, because he's not a real person. For Job to experience this, he has to be a real person, or the book means nothing to us. If we can't identify in Job's humanity, the book means nothing. Plus, the attack is nothing from Satan then. Satan is attacking a real human that's really goes against our motivation for worshiping God. And here in chapter 1, we worship God only because we're afraid of losing what we have. That's the number one question. And the result would be, if you take it away, he'll curse you to your face. We have to keep that in mind. Curse you to your face. That's going to come into play at the end of the chapter here. So look at verse 13. This is really, really good literature because it's foreshadowing. Now it happened on the day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house. So the cycle from chapter 1, verse 5 begins again. So this is another year. The brother probably just turned another year older. Now the author leaves that there as a temporal marker, but it's not just a temporal marker that we're back on earth. it's going to be foreshadowing because we know that Satan just left and nothing good can happen when Satan just left God's presence. Because God has given Satan permission to strike the man. And anything but his body is fair game. So a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing, the donkeys feeding beside it. So a normal day, the Sabians attacked and took them. They slew the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. The Hebrew there is not really strong enough. It's I by myself alone have escaped. So it tells you he just lost all his donkeys. The oxen and his donkeys, and he lost all his servants, say one. Now the servant is still talking, and while he's still speaking, another also came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven, probably lightning, burned up the sheep and the servants, consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Again, same exact phrase. I by myself have escaped. So in one fell swoop, he's lost donkeys and oxen. Now he's lost his sheep and all his servants. And then 17, while he's still speaking, another also came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, made a rage, and the camels took them, slew the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Then, while he was still speaking, and this phrase comes up 4 times, 16, 17, 18. So there's no room to breathe here. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, your sons and your daughters were eating, drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came up from across the wilderness, struck the 4 corners of the house. It fell on the young people and they died. I alone by myself have escaped to tell you. Wow. And I read it quickly on purpose because that's how quickly it happened. Even quicker than that because I didn't step on myself to read. So really verses 13 through 19 takes away verses 2 to 5. In one moment, Job realizes all this. So what's the wager? We have to keep the wager in mind before we read verse 20.
Whether Job will curse him or not.
And where's the curse come from, Rich? Where's the curse come from?
His mouth?
Yes. Keep that in mind. That's important. That's extremely important. I know it sounds like a little thing, but it's going to be extremely important to understand the book. Because now we say it's only after he hears about his kids. Because he would have heard about the donkeys, somewhere around verse 17. It's only after he hears about his kids. Oh, and let's go back a little bit, right? You have these things happening. The Sabians, you can almost understand it. Then we get this fire from heaven. This had to be a unique thing that happened. Lightning, but it burns up all the sheep. Talk about a barbecue. I mean, how many sheep, did he have? 7,000 sheep. My goodness. Burned them all up. But what's interesting is this wind. Behold, a great wind came from across the wilderness, struck the 4 corners of the house. I think that's interesting. When a wind comes, and you guys from the Midwest know this, that, when a wind comes, it comes across normally in one direction. And you can even see where the wind came. Here, this is told about it hits the 4 corners of the house together. That seems odd. What kind of wind does that? So I think it's something unnatural, and maybe the reader wants us to see Satan's hand behind this even more than just the dialogue. Because the wind normally would hit one side of the house and the house would collapse. Here it hits all 4 corners at the same time. It seems somewhat odd. So Job arose, and notice it really slows down. As much as the action was going quickly in 13 through 19, it slows down with these verbs. He arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, fell to the ground, and worshiped. Now, it's really important to note that the text doesn't stop there, because how did he worship? And he said, now all of heaven is waiting now, because all of heaven, remember, the good angels and the bad angels all summoned before God, they've heard this wager between God and Satan. And they're saying, what will the man say? Remember, I don't know if there's betting in heaven, but you have to wonder if the good angels and bad angels were taking side bets, because God was putting his glory into the hands of a man. And the last time we saw this in the Bible, it didn't work out well, because it was with Adam and Eve. And they kind of let God down. He gave them one command, they couldn't do it. Now, God gives it to Job, and he trusts his glory, and this is where I agree with you, Grant, he does trust his glory into the hands of the man Job to prove Satan wrong. That's a lot of trust that God puts into man. And what does he say? Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of Yahweh. What's the importance of that blessed be? What's the importance of that blessed be in relationship to the wager?
Job is passing the test and proving he's going to uphold God's glory.
But in which way exactly? You're not wrong in your summary, but why does he say blessed? Why is blessed such an important word here?
Would it be because all of his blessings are being removed?
Not quite.
That's the
Opposite of
the
cursing?
curse. Yeah.
Yes. Blessing is the opposite of cursing. Do you see the connection with Deuteronomy? Satan said he'll curse you. What does Job do? He doesn't just say nothing, which would still maintain the wager. He actually does the opposite. He blesses God. This is vitally important to understand the whole book, that he blesses God instead of cursing. And notice he says, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. What is he saying in that? What does he mean? I mean, what theology do we get from nakedness here?
Is he kind of saying that everything belongs to God anyway?
Yeah, exactly. Hey, if you ever notice, tonight, guys, when you take your clothes off, standing in front of the mirror naked, what are you missing? What don't you have?
Anything?
Confidence.
You don't have pockets. You have no pockets. You're not a kangaroo. I mean, you take nothing with you. You came in the world with nothing, and you go out with nothing. Maybe more wrinkles, right? Someone said. Okay? And then he even says it, this nakedness, Yahweh gives, the law is taken away. Interesting that he used the covenant name of God, and this is before the covenant. So how's that working out? So Job knows him as Yahweh. But he blesses the name of the Lord. And in case you miss it, the narrator says, verse 22. And this shows you that the book is written, not just acted out in real time, because this statement would not be needed. Through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. What is that doing there? What is verse 22 doing there?
I think it's again giving credibility to the righteous thing. Like it's showing that he's still not sinning, so he still doesn't deserve this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. It shows that the wager is secure. So he did not break. As a matter of fact, just the opposite. He blesses God. Now, at this point, you're saying, whew, good. Wow. Whew. Now, Job and his wife still have no idea what happened. So look at chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh, Satan also came among them to present himself before Yahweh. And Yahweh said to Satan, where have you come from? And Satan gives the same answer as before, from roaming about on the earth and walking around on it. And Yahweh says to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there was no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. And he adds something here. He still holds fast his integrity. And this word in the Hebrew, holds fast, means he seizes it even greater than before. Although you incited me against him to ruin him without cause. So this goes to Trey's statement that, hey, I ruined him. You incited me against him, and there was no cause to ruin him because there was nothing to curse the man because he was upright, fearing God and turning away from evil. What is Satan's response in verse 4? How do you guys read that? You read the commentaries, you read your textbooks. How do you answer verse 4?
I think the new accusation is, well, Job is only clinging to you, hoping that his life is still spared.
Okay. That's going to be the accusation for sure. You know, what's this phrase, skin for skin? Go ahead, Trey.
The things that happened to him so far were external. Like, he lost wealth, he lost his family, things like that, but he himself, he's still fine.
Okay. And actually, this idea, skin for skin, probably means that he traded the life of his kids for his own. As long as it didn't touch him, he was happy. Now, anybody who's a father would say, you know, that's sacrilegious to say I would trade my life for my kid's life. You know, any father worth his salt would do just the opposite. So Satan answered, and Yahweh said, skin for skin. Yeah, he traded it. Yes, all the man has, he will give for his life. Now, put forth your hand now, touch his bone and his flesh, and it's the same accusation. He will curse you to your face. Wow. Touch him. Now let's make it personal. Same wager. Then Satan went out. So the Lord said, Satan, behold, he's in your power, only spare his life. Again, guys, the divine vending machine. If we put in our wealth, we put in our coins of worship, our coins of devotion, our coins of obedience, we really expect health, wealth, and prosperity. You know, there's this movement, you know, you guys probably heard of deconstruction of faith. You know, based on all the situations I've read about, I think all of it goes back to Job 1 and 2. People are disappointed with God because they put their coins of worship in and they've not got out wealth or health, or life hasn't gone their way. And I get it. But you see, that's more of a retribution theology, right? I'm righteous. I should get the good life. I shouldn't have to suffer. And I understand. We want, you know, be healthy, wealthy, and wise. Satan knows that, and he really believes that we only worship God because not just prosperity in chapter 1, but because we have health in chapter 2. Take your health away, and you will drop God like a hot potato. Is that true?
I think Hebrews 12:4 would argue against that pretty strongly.
Yeah, but you know, that's theoretical. That's theological. What happens when it comes down to man? Because I got news for you. As much as we can hold Job and others up, there's others that have forsaken God because God's not come through. I mean, and think about, you know, Ali Wiesel, who lived through the Holocaust. He could not believe in a God that would allow the Holocaust. allow such suffering. So as much as you have a Job, you have an Ali Wiesel who suffered and suffered immensely. So you're going to have people in your church that struggle with this, but this idea of I put something in, I get something out. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. So, everything from the top to the bottom. You get that merism, right? From the top to his bottom, that's a merism. We talked about that already as a literary device, and it's true here. And no one knows what this disease is. Okay. I won't go through all of the symptoms, but I went through the entire book and put all the symptoms into order. It's no disease that we recognize today. Okay. But one thing it's interesting is that the sores are all over his body, and that's why he takes the potsherd to scrape himself. And a potsherd is a broken piece of pottery. Think about a clay pot that you see in a Home Depot or Lowe's, the orange ones, and he just takes it and scrapes it, and he's scraping the pus off. And inside the pus are worms, which just makes it fascinating. So you have these worms crawling all over you and this pus. So not is only the man struggling with all the loss of chapter 1, now he's struggling with this intense pain emotionally and physically. And remember, too, we don't know how long it was between chapter 1 and chapter 2. It could have been a year. It could have been a month. We have no idea how long it could have been. But it continues. Look at verse 9. Then his wife says to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Which God said he did in verse 3. Curse God and die. All right. What do we say about Mrs. Job?
She was left with him for a reason.
Yeah, you're not wrong, Trey. She does actually voice what Satan wants to do. And some suggest that's why Satan left her. Now, he can't predict what she's going to say. But at the same time, we can't be too hard on Mrs. Job. Remember, she's not the central character. And this goes back to what I said earlier in our overview. Look at the characters. She's not the central one. She's only a foil to give a reason for Job. And actually, it's almost a sympathetic one, because she wants Job to die because dying would be better than living for Job. And we get it because he's suffering so much. But what does he say to her? Verse 10. But he says to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Not that he says you're foolish, but as one of those foolish women speak. And then what does he say? Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? Rhetorical question, but what's his answer supposed to mean? This is critical for chapter 2.
Doesn't that kind of go back to that idea of, you only love him for what he does for you?
Yes. Yeah, and this is what Satan says. Hey, touch him and he'll curse you. Now, what's interesting between here and chapter 1 is what? What's the difference between here and chapter 1?
It says, despite all this, Job did not sin with his lips, but he's not blessing God at the moment either.
Right. But the author, even though he accepts it with the rhetorical question, shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? And the answer to the rhetorical question is, yeah, we have to accept it. So he does accept it. Even though he doesn't bless God for it, he doesn't curse God either. So at this point, the wager is still secure. He doesn't curse Satan. And the author, the narrator, makes it clear for us. he says, in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Why does he say he didn't sin with his lips?
Because that's the wager.
Give it more specifically.
Still upholding his righteousness and integrity.
Okay, but more, why is the importance of the lips? Richard, I was pressing you on this. Why is the importance of the lips?
Because out of your lips flows your heart.
Comes the curse.
Yeah.
See, the author wants you to see that nothing out of his lips came close to a curse. That's why the author says, it just didn't say he didn't sin. He didn't sin with his lips. That lips is important to show. Satan said he will curse you to your face. The curse has to come from the moving of the lips. The author
That makes me
wants you
think
to
of
be-
Romans.
How's that?
It makes me think of Romans, because in Romans, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord.
Yep, it has to come from the
Oh.
lips, right? So here, Satan, the author wants you to know there was no sin. So at this point, we're saying what? If you're the angels in heaven, what are you saying?
At this point, you're pretty confident.
Yep. You're exactly right, Grant. At this point, you're the good angels in heaven. You're saying, wow. Now, so actually, I would think chapter 3 should start with verse 11, but we'll leave it there. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity had come upon him, they came each one from his own place: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamanite. They made an appointment to come together. I think that appointment was with each other, to sympathize with him and comfort him. And when they lifted up their eyes at a distance and did not recognize him, guys, that's how bad this disease was, that they could not recognize him. That's pretty bad when you have boils over your body so badly that your friends can't recognize you. And what did they do? They raised their voices and wept. Each tore his robe. They threw dust over their heads towards the sky. They sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, when no one speaking a word to him, for they saw that his pain was very great. Again, outside observer recognizing his pain was so great. So this is not Job sharing that, oh man, I hurt my thumb and I'm in pain. No, everyone recognizes, his 3 friends recognize he is in great pain. Unknown pain, like no disease like ever before. So they are very good friends. They gave up, all the traveling they had to do to come to be with Job. And they did something that I don't know if many of us could do, is they just sit with their friend for 7 days and don't say anything to him. They just be present with him in his suffering, which is really a good friend does, just be present with him in his suffering. Chapter 3. What's the purpose of chapter 3 now, being moving from narrative to poetic devices?
Of the situation, maybe.
Okay. What's the situation specifically?
That his health was terrible. He's living in pain and emotional pain, physical pain. I mean, poverty, you name it.
Okay.
I think the first 3 the first 2 chapters, they give us the events and there's a little bit of talking, but now we get into how Job actually experiences it.
And why is that important?
Well, for a few reasons, but I do think that part of it is to show that, even the righteous, still are human and experience real emotions. They're not just these perfect obedience robots that don't feel anything. So I don't know.
Okay. Something else. You're missing a clue in chapter 3, verse 1.
He still does curse something.
Yeah.
Curses from life.
He curses the day of his birth. See, the book has to be dialogue from here on out because the wager is still in place. Will the man curse God? And where will the curse come from? His mouth. And how will we know what he's saying? Through dialogue. So the narrator is not going to tell us. He's going to let us overhear the conversation. So all of heaven now is waiting. So you have, you literally have two drama stages. You have it on earth is one drama. Then you have in heaven is the other drama. That's actually, this is a play within a play, so to speak. We see heaven looking down on earth, and all the angels and even God and Satan are watching. What will the man do? Because it's not like the wager was taken away at the end of chapter 2. The wager is still in place. And if everybody is nodding off after 7 days of silence, as soon as Job opened his mouth, that's a key phrase. He opened his mouth. And at that point, everybody should say, what's the man going to say? He's opening his mouth. Has he had enough? Is he going to curse God? Because the wager in chapter 2 is still in play. And it doesn't get resolved until chapter 42. Until Job shuts his mouth. You have to, and that's the reason why the book goes from narrative in chapter 1 and 2 to dialogue. We have to be able to hear the man when he opens his mouth. And we're all waiting to see, will the man curse? Now, afterwards, Job opened his mouth. And we're wondering, will it be a curse? Afterwards, ties it back to chapter 2. He cursed the day or his birthday is really what it comes down to. Okay. He curses the day, not God. But what's the significance of cursing his day and not God? What's the significance here?
Seems like he's still not blaming God, but he kind of understands that the situation he's going through is something. He doesn't know what it is, which will be more clear later.
Yeah, but there's something more taking place, and you can't be afraid to say it.
He
Because
doesn't want to suffer.
All right. What's that, Rich?
He wishes his life away and just.
Okay, but in wishing his life away, what is that saying? All right, let's read something together. So Job opened his mouth, cursed the day of his birth. And how does he curse? Curse is, not F words, not a 4-letter word. It's not those type of thing. A curse is to blame somebody for something. So Job opened his mouth and said, and notice he had all these lets, right? These wishes, 2 through 6. Let the day perish in which I was to be born, the night which said a boy is conceived. Let the day be darkness, let not God care for it, nor let light shine in it. Let darkness and black gloom claim it. Let a cloud settle on it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for the light, let the darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of months. What does verse 6 say? What does it mean?
Basically, that, I mean, even though he's not directly blaming God, he's saying that it would have been better if he was never born, and it was God's decision to create him.
Exactly. So what you're starting to see is this subtle hint of Job, and this is going to be Job's main argument, and this is what God's going to address in chapter 38. God, you don't know how to run your universe. Because up to this point, Job has not sinned. But so his suffering is not cause of sinning, but in his suffering, he will sin. Because he really here, he's going to accuse God of not knowing how to run his universe. And really what he's accusing God is, if this is my life, why was I born? Grant, what day were you born?
November 4th.
Oh, November 4th. Okay. So if you were Job and Job shared your birthday, he would say, I wish November 4th wasn't on the calendar. I wish we went from November 3rd to November 5th. Because if we did, that means there was no November 4th. That means there was no you. That's exactly what Job is saying. You know, my birthday was October 11th. He's saying, hey, I wish it was October 10th to October 12th. That's how bad Job feels. Then that's why he says, you know, behold, let the night be barren, let no joyful shout enter it. Then let those who curse it, who curse the day, who are prepared to rouse Leviathan. That means if you don't curse this day with me, you are arousing this creature, which I believe is a real creature. And, you know, if you want to study, hey, find out who Leviathan and Behemoth are. You know, and scholars are all over the map on who it could be. I think it's just a dinosaur that we're not familiar with, based on the description that God gives in the later chapter book. Then let the stars and twilight be darkened. Let it wait for the light, but have none. Neither let it see the breaking dawn, because it did not shut the opening of my mother's womb, or, and this is a real reason, hide trouble from my eyes. Hey, I wish this day was not there. Why? Because I've seen all this trouble. And this trouble is not just physical now. I think he's taking all of chapter 1, all of chapter 2 into mind. Now, because that can't happen, because we can't erase days from the calendar, he moves on to verse 11. And again, it's personal. Notice the first person. Why did I not die at birth? Come forth from the womb and expire. Why did the knees receive me, a midwife? Why the breast that I should suck? For now I would have, if I died, I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept then. I would have been at rest with the kings, with counselors of the earth, who rebuilt ruins for themselves, which means it was no purpose. Or with kings who had gold, who were filling their houses with silver. Or like a miscarriage which is discarded, I would not be, as infants that never saw light. There the wicked cease from raging, and there the weary are at rest. The prisoners are at ease. They do not hear the voice of the taskmaster. The small and great are there, and the slave is free from his master. Hey, it just means even if I died at birth, it'd be better than living now, because there's freedom from all of this suffering. Now he almost waxes philosophical in verse 20. And this is the question that many really grab onto. Why is light given to him who suffers, and life to the bitter of soul? So that's one question, Grant, you and I were talking about. So this does answer the question a little bit. It doesn't answer why is light given to him. That question is never answered in the book. God never takes Job around the shoulder and say, even at the end of the book, Job, let me explain it. Now, the book of Job explains it. Hey, there's something else happening here that's bigger than just you. It happens to do with God's glory, and will you handle God's glory in front of all the angels? That's bigger. But it's not all of why suffering. It's just one small part of it. Who long for death, but there is none. Who dig for it more than for hidden treasure. Who rejoice greatly, they exalt when they find the grave. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God is hedged in? What's the problem with this statement? Satan accuses God of hedging Job in verse 10 of chapter 1. But what's wrong with the statement here in chapter 3?
In this case, is he blaming God for kind of forcing him to have life instead of rest?
I don't think so. Who's really the one who's hedged them in?
Satan.
This isn't, yes. See, and that's what we should be shouting across the pages at Job. Is there something you don't understand? That there's something else. There's another agency involved, Job. You're too quick to blame God because he's blaming God for everything that's happened. He's not. Now, God did give permission, absolutely. But God's not to blame. Who's the instrument here? Satan.
How often do you ever hear somebody say that, though? Like, why is Satan doing this to me, you know?
Oh, you're absolutely
I don't
right.
think I've ever heard anybody say that.
You know, because who always gets blamed? God. And I think there's a reason why God always gets blamed. Because he's the only one that can change it.
But ultimately, he allows it.
He does allow it, sure, but he's not the agent. He's not the cause. And there's a difference.
So would you disagree then with some? Because I've also heard it phrased that when Job says, "Shall we accept good from God and not evil or calamity?" that it's a recognition that God is the ultimate sovereign cause, even though he's not the agent. But you would say it's more that it's based on Job's limited human understanding.
Yes. I do believe in the sovereignty of God, and I do believe that nothing comes through into our lives that doesn't pass through God's hands first. I do believe that 100%. Okay. But everything has to pass through his hand. So it comes with his permission. Yeah, I get that. All right. So I do believe in his sovereignty, but God is not always the cause, although he allows it. And I think that is a crucial distinction, especially here in this book, because God has not hedged Job in. Satan has. And that's the whole crux of the book, is that Job's theological focus is too limited. So you have to ask the question now, who's the book of Job written for? It wasn't written for Job. It was written to us. Because we see the whole story. Job never saw the whole story. So maybe after the book was written. We don't know what he knew about Satan. We know now because of the book of Job. That I believe that the book of Job is not just historical. It's not just history. As wisdom literature, I think it's tracing a dynamic that still happens today. I still think Satan still comes before God, and God still says, "Have you tried my servant Grant?" There's no one like him in the world. An upright man, blameless, fearing God. And Satan said, does he fear God for nothing? See, I think this dynamic didn't stop with Job. God is still looking for men and women who's in their hands, his glory is safe. Now, I don't know what it is. I don't know what God may do and how he may put you on the stage, but the only explanation is that this book is written to the original audience and to us, because it's wisdom literature, that it makes sense. Because it makes no sense if it's just for Job and it's history. All right, big deal. No, this is an ongoing issue. And now you always have a choice. So when you suffer loss or you suffer physical pain, You have a choice. Will I worship God for who he is, or will I lose faith? And that's what Job is going to do. He's going to question God's running of the universe, and he starts it here in chapter 3. And all throughout the book, his friend's going to accuse Job of being bad, all right? Because all they know is retribution theology. Job's 3 friends, from chapter 4 on, they all think that Job is this terrible, terrible sinner, even though they can't point out one sin. And even though Job says, look at my life, man, tell me where I blew it. He's open with them, but they cannot say one sin. But they don't know anything else but Deuteronomy. Hey, God only blesses the good, he curses the bad. If you're being cursed, man, you must be bad. They don't have any other way of thinking about it. So that's what the book continues. And we go all the way, from chapter 4. And I think the saddest verse in all the Bible is chapter 4, verse 1. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered, really, I want God to answer. I just wrote an article for Israel, My Glory, that's going to come out this year, where I argue for Job chapter 4 as being the saddest verse in the Bible, because God doesn't answer Job. Because that's what Job wants. He just answered all these why questions in chapter 3. Now I get Eliphaz to answer. I don't want Eliphaz, I want God. But because of time, I want you to go to the end of the book. Now look at chapter 38. God finally comes on the scene after listening to everybody speak. Then Yahweh answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Does that sound a little bit different to you than chapter 1 and 2 of Job?
Very different tone.
Yeah, very different, because he was a man who's upright. We're my servant. Notice he said, my servant Job in chapter 1 and 2. He doesn't say my servant Job here, because Job has lost the fear of God. And that's what chapter 28 really says, is that everyone's lost wisdom in chapter 28. So he says, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Like, who are you? Then he says, now gird up your loins like a man. I'll ask you and you instruct me. Guys, if God ever comes to you and says, hey, you tell me how to run the universe, I would repent right there on the spot. Don't get into a long conversation with God. It's not going to end well. God starts off with almost 72 interrogatives. Why the interrogatives? Why 72 questions?
I don't know off the top of my head, but is that the same amount of questions that Job asked God?
I don't know. That's a good question to see. I don't know if they're equal. That'd be interesting to figure out. Anybody else? Why the 72 questions? And also, Job can't answer any of these, by the way. Why is the
That's what
answer?
I was going to say, like, to show him that he knows nothing.
Thank you. Because right up to this point, Job's been telling God, you're unrighteous, you're unloving, you're unkind, and you don't know how to run my universe. So he wasn't suffering because of his sin, but in his sin, in his suffering, he did begin to sin. That's why God calls him a fault finder. And the fault was he started in chapter 3 questioning God, and Grant, you said it, God allowed him to be born. And he's really questioning God, saying, why'd you let me be born? Well, now the fault finder is questioning God. Even in chapter 40, after the first string of questions, then Yahweh said to Job, and notice, very different characteristic, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves God answer it. He's been reproving God. And the reproof is you don't know how to run your universe. And God says, okay, answer me. And then it's interesting in chapter 40, then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I'm insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. Once I've spoken, I will not answer. Even twice, I will add no more. That is not repentance here. What he's saying is, I'm not convinced. I have nothing more to say. That's why God has to say in verse 6, then the Lord answered Job because of verse 5, now gird your loins like a man. I'll ask you, and you instruct me. And this is critical here. Will you really annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you might be justified? See, this is what Job was doing. He was condemning God and God's wisdom to organize the world. And now God gets more specific. He goes with Leviathan and Behemoth, and it's not until chapter 42 that Job answers the Lord and says, now he interrupts the Lord and says, I know you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I declare that which I do not understand, things too wonderful for me which I do not know. Here now I will speak. I'll ask you, you instruct me. Therefore I've heard of you by the hearing of the eyes. Now I see with my eyes. Therefore I retract, I repent in dust and ashes. It's not until here that Job actually repents of his accusations against God. And notice, what does God say in chapter 42, verse 8? Actually, it starts in verse 7, but goes into verse 8. What's the key phrase that's repeated 4 times?
His servant.
My servant Job. Yes, repeated 4 times. So the fault finder from chapter 3 on, now because of his repentance, is back to being the servant of God. The one key we have to answer now is, so Job did not sin to cause his suffering, but in his suffering he did sin. So he didn't deserve the suffering, but he did sin. So what does the sinning Job deserve in chapter 42? This is critical to understand the ending of the book.
Well, if there was retribution, that's where it would hit.
Okay, in which way, Trey?
Well, if he's finally sinning, so you'd think, okay, he sinned, it's time for retribution and punishment for that sin.
And what would that mean in response to how the book ends?
Well, he wouldn't be rewarded. Like his.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does everybody understand what Trey's saying? He said it really well. Not all scholars will agree, but I agree with Trey. Notice what happens in verse 10. Then the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he prayed for his friends, and the Lord increased all that Job had twofold. That means everything in chapter 1, he doubled. And we see the numbers down in verse 12. What's the purpose of doubling if the man was wrong in the way he accused God?
I think because real faith involves repentance and humility, not sinless perfectionism.
Okay, some have suggested that. Some say he got double because he was faithful. But the problem with that, Grant, is that he wasn't faithful because he accused God of being unkind, unholy. So why does he get double if he was accusing God?
Because it's grace.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
If you think about the purpose of the book in relationship to the friends, it may help us. I mean, other scholars say you're right. I disagree, but other scholars might say you're right. I think there's a better explanation. What do the friends believe?
They believed the full
Job.
on retribution theology. So,
So
they were
what
believing
is the,
something that was
so
wrong about God.
so what does this ending prove, Trey?
They were wrong.
They really prove that God can do what he wants. And that retribution theology, it turns retribution theology in the head. Because up to this point, the friends believe that Job is sinning. Once God speaks to them, the friends know that what? Job did sin. Now they would expect what of God? Exactly what Trey said, retribution. What does God give Job? Double. That turns the book on his head. He should not get double. And Grant, this is, and you answered the question really, this is a real bugaboo in the end of the book. Why is Job rewarded? And I think the retribution angle is a much better explanation than the faithful angle. Because the only thing you could say is repentance, but not every time is repentance given such blessing like this. That becomes problematic. That almost sounds like prosperity gospel. I think it's easier to say, hey, God can do what he wants to do because retribution is not at play here. And God did reward Job. So that's how the book ends, with this ending that satisfies everything. Job doesn't deserve it, but he gets it anyways because God gets to decide how to run his universe. And all faithful people will say, hey, God, I trust you. You're God, and I trust you. Because I can't answer any of those questions in Job 38 to 42. And if you can order the universe, God, then I can trust you. And that's the gist of my article, is that I don't need the answer. And notice, Job never gets an answer to his why question of chapter 3. He gets an answer, but the answer is who? And this is the argument I make in my article. When we go through suffering, I don't need an answer to my why question. Nietzsche said, a man who understands the why of his suffering can endure anything. I disagree. Just because I understand why I'm going through it doesn't help me go through it. But if I know the who of my suffering, and it's God, I can trust him for it. And that's okay. That's the answer to suffering in Job. Job doesn't give us the question, answer the question, why do the innocent suffer? That question is never answered. It does give us the who behind suffering. And it asks the question, can you trust God? Because that's what God asked Job at the end. Hey, you're really going to fault me so you can be right? You really want to go there? You don't have an arm like me. You don't have wisdom like me. Who are you? That, in a nutshell, is the book of Job. Questions, comments?
Well, I was just gonna say, I guess one thing with that at the end is God didn't owe Job that reward at the end. God still would have been just as good even if he didn't give him that.
Right. And I think everyone recognized it, but that's what turns retribution on his head, because he does get it. And that's what makes the retribution, so neat to see it turned on its head, that God can do what he wants, because it makes exactly your point. And this shows that God is ultimately in charge, so you don't have this formulaic application of Deuteronomy all the time. The blessings and cursings. So
That kind of think of like in the beginning we were talking about how the wager is kind of, will you only do for you? And then this kind of shows God only love you what you do, because
yeah, I can see that. Yeah, God doesn't put us based on performance, that's for sure. Because it's interesting, all Job had to do was repent, and God called him my servant again. It's not based on action except repentance. Yeah, it's relationship.
Relationship. If you only love for what they do for you or what they can do, or is that truly love?
Yep, that's true. Yeah, it's based on relationship for sure. All right, guys, we just finished week 7 and week 6. Next week, week 7, we'll go into the book of Ecclesiastes. Then we'll finish up with song on week 8. So again, email me your suggestions for your research and make it, a good thesis statement. All right. I want to prove, or I want to study, X, Y, Z. So make sure it's clear and concise. All right. And at least 5 sources for the entire paper. All right. Questions, comments, concerns?
Sounds
You
good.
really scared
Thank
me when
you.
you said week 7.
What's that? Thought I heard
I
somebody
thought
say
you
so.
really scared me with that week 7.
7. Oh, week 7. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It's week. We
Week
just
7. I was like 7. Oh no, I'm panicking.
that's only week 6. So we go into week 7 next week. So only 2 weeks left though. So semester's going quick. All right, guys, have a good week, and I'll see you next Tuesday.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
one.